Good morning, LinkedIn. Good afternoon to those overseas like Willem. Welcome to another episode of Let's Build Onboarding, mostly HubSpot onboarding, but really, onboarding in general. How you doing, Willem?
Very good. Very good. Excited for today. And like you said, it's just not just about HubSpot onboarding, but I think that the best practices that you use for one thing apply for anything else as well.
Yeah, it certainly can and often does, whether we want to, accept it or not. Like we get so wrapped up in SaaS versus manufacturing versus financial services. And at the end of the day, we're all humans that need training. We need to know what's going on. We need to know why we're being asked to do these things. And uh, as you were mentioning before we got started, this idea of user onboarding and how like it's easy to approach it from like a check the box, like, okay, we got the first list done. Now can I have a list for the user? Right. And these are going to be my users and this is the team that they're on. So can you give me the sales checklist so I can just go check that off? Right. And something that came to mind is that, when I was building teams out and we're bringing in HubSpot and we're trying to bring all this change, right? And it's related to the growth. Like I tried to have everybody with the mentality of, as we learn to do this, as we learn how to use the system, as we create together, like try to approach it from like at some point you're likely going to have to teach somebody else like how to do
Exactly.
this, right? So I
And,
love the
and
way you approached
if
that
it's
and
not,
said,
if you don't have to teach somebody else, you're doing something wrong.
right, you're not
And that
growing,
is
right?
really the mindset that you should have. But even if a company is not growing, there is turnover in personnel. And
Mm-hmm.
what I see in my role as a customer success manager a lot is that people purchased HubSpot or they hired HubSpot, no matter how you want to bring it. But let's just say that they did that 2 years ago. And just about everybody who was there during the onboarding is no longer with the company. And they are like, yeah, well, we use it a little bit, but if I ask, why did you purchase it? It's like, wasn't me. And that's the closest to an answer that you get, basically. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're impossible to work with, but it is very, very hard to try to convince somebody who is using the product for, in some cases, even 2 years, but is not using it correctly, who thinks that they know
Well,
that there are different best practices.
yeah. And they know one thing. They know that HubSpot's not working. So there's an intense focus on that piece, without often taking any responsibility for why it's not working. Um, but, we keep hearing about, uh, and this is why it's such a, we got to start delivering these goods and services, if you will, much more strategically than we have because there's so many stories of bad onboardings. There's so many stories of just millions of dollars being lost at just like 2 year implementations. And then everybody's still in spreadsheets. Nobody trusts the system. So I think what we're about to start sharing today is, you know, we're here because we don't want that to happen to you. And it doesn't have to happen to you. But when you know that all this external stuff is happening and all of the users and leaders, they have this baggage, they've heard these stories, right? And if you don't find a way to kind of unpack that and deliver, you get yourselves in situations that are not solved by checklists.
Yeah, but I'm going to say that there are two situations which are not perfect. One is the user is using, let's say, 10% of what they pay for instead of what I'm going to say averages out to about 30%. So they're only using a fraction of what they should use. And they're okay with that because nobody told them that the platform can do a lot more. That's on one hand a risk. And keep in mind, I'm saying of the 30% that they should be using, because I don't think that any customer should be maxing out on everything. The platform is created to kind of serve everybody. And that means that if you only use 30%, yeah, that's pretty decent.
I
But
mean, I'll say like, unless you have the resources required to max out, like so often it's just, okay, super admin, just be super, and you're in charge of the website, you're in charge of help desk, you're in charge of sales sequences. Like that's the part, like you, it's, it's just like, imagine like a manufacturing line where you had all these different, you had, you had prep and you had putting stuff together and you had like, the press. And I should be better at the names for all these things, but you have all these different stations that need to come together to create the final product. In this
yeah,
case, we're trying to create a customer experience, with HubSpot. There's no world where you ask one person to go and just handle all those stations. It might have been you at the beginning, right? But now you got to get 100 pieces out the door, right? And this infrastructure is given to you, and it's just like there's just a disconnect because it's digital. We're logging into one place. It all feels the same. Why do we need to onboard all these people in this way?
yeah. But to refer to your example, because I think that that's a very nice example about a factory with all kinds of machines in there. You basically purchase a factory. You're going to use a number of the, I'm going to say presses and all that sort of stuff. You somehow start out with people that know how to operate that somehow. You know that there will be a turnover in your staff. And you're going to say, well, if somebody leaves all of a sudden, we just hire a random person, put them next to the machine, and hopefully they'll figure it out. How is that for a business
That's how
plan?
I learned. That's how I had
Yeah.
to do it, right? They can do it.
Yeah, but it's not ideal in a world where basically you can screw up your entire go-to-market process.
Yeah. Like how much has changed since you had to learn it? Like inside the business and outside of the business, right? Like, and then instead of like, I think when you approach these onboardings as strategies, right? And you can really dig deep on like, okay, why are we in this situation? This person just left. It's a lot more painful than I was expecting it to be. Like, what can we do differently this time? Maybe it's not one person getting trained and then not setting up any other trainings. I mean, that's the stuff that happens all the time in almost every space. And there's this push and pull. And we try to develop these like green light, red light processes or these easy buttons that tries to take that part out. And you just can't. So
Yes.
recently I've had the insight of like all this in-person stuff that we can't do anymore that we used to do, like the ride-alongs for trainings and the job shadowing, just watch over my shoulder. Like it's literally, you cannot do that. So if we don't kind of replace that kind of experience, like digitally through like, there's going to be how-tos and training guides and you can watch all the videos in the world. But if at some point you're not having a conversation about why and what, and like maybe thinking about some outcomes, what happens next, right? What's going to happen in 6 months? What happens when, you know, they got to go on maternity or paternity leave, right? What happens when they have some kids? What happens when, we want to have some grace and let people go on vacation? Like, are we just
Oh,
not going to
don't do
do
that.
that part?
Yeah.
Right? Like, uh, yeah. And like when we say onboarding, it's like bringing people into a process that will work for them, that they will thrive in. Uh, and in, and then when you do it that way, like the dominoes, right? Now they want to do the same thing, for the next person. Now they're helping each other, on board and get value. And it's just kind of this compounding effect, I think.
Yeah, but how much can you basically set up as a structure? Because, like I said, for me, everything is about a process. How much can you set up as a repeatable structure where you don't necessarily need uh, a person to handhold all the way? Because I personally believe that if you onboard somebody, a user in HubSpot, there should be in-person training in one form or another. But that will only get you so far. And what I really see a lot is that a company tries to, because there are many different ways to fail. One of the things where customers fail is they onboard the entire team with HubSpot. HubSpot isn't ready to use yet. It will take another 2 months. Everything is forgotten, and then everybody is like, oh yeah, let's use it now. And everybody struggles. And that really is not the perfect way to go. One other way is, okay, let's just onboard everybody at the right time. But if I would say, ask you, let's say there's an average company and there are 20 people onboarded on HubSpot. How many of them are still working there in 2 years' time? And
It's 20.
are you absolutely sure that everybody is still in the role? How about the decay in knowledge that you see, and how do you prevent that?
Yeah. And I'm thinking like starting to connect this to some other stuff. Like you know, when I was experiencing this inside, like why are we doing this over and over? How do these businesses get away with no onboarding plans, no training plans, no internal communication? And during COVID and like, you know, the expectations increase. And I started relating it to like uncertainty, right? Humans do not like the feeling of uncertainty and they want to be able to know immediately now because we have our phones, we can Google, we have AI now. Amazon is constantly informing us of what happens next. So I'm never uncertain, right? And as you just say that, like we got to find a way to surround people
Yeah.
constantly with the information that they need because you could have trained them, you know, yesterday. They might have done it 5 times with you in that moment, but a lot of stuff has happened. It's 12 hours later, it's 16 hours later, right? They might be
It's
dealing,
out of the
they might
window.
they might have remembered it completely, but something personal just happened or this customer fire just came up and now they're just not, they just need a little bit of hand holding. And if they could go and click on that button that says, yeah, remember, this is how you do it. And it's like, bam. If they can't do that though, now they start developing their own processes because they got to get their job done. Right.
And then you get a siloed company because everybody will have their own processes. And realistically, what you should start the onboarding with is, okay, the person that I'm onboarding now will be replaced one day. How do I onboard the next person? And if you start with that idea, then you're going to say, okay, if I tell you something now, it should be documented. If there's a process, it should be documented. Because I don't want to, let's for now say, you are one of my employees. I'm considering that maybe in a year time you will go missing in action for one reason or another. You will not do a proper handover. How do I possibly get the next person in? Because if I get a replacement in, that means that there is no time for a nice handover. That person will be thrown into the deep and it will be like, yeah, well, you don't have time. You already have a shitload of work because it took us a month to hire you. And now go sort it out. How long does it take for that person to leave?
Not long in some cases.
Yeah.
Like I've heard some stories like people leaving same day. And this is the impact of all, when you don't put people in a position to be successful, whether it's the tools, whether it's the training, whether it's just the environment. Like, can I have adjustable desk, please. If you're asking me to sit all day, like all this stuff goes into like, we need to put these people in a position to be successful. And we are in control of that. I just had a great conversation with George about this. One of the few things you can control as a leader is programs like this, like getting the structure in place to support your team, creating the environment for people to thrive in, right? Understanding that they're all different humans, they all learn different ways. And when we don't do that, right? Like we're lucky if they, do the things that we would like them to do, right? Not everybody's going to stick around just because they're getting paid. If I'm, and I, yeah,
Yeah, it's difficult, but to bring it back a little bit to HubSpot, and I'm gonna show one page that you've shared before. So I am aware that I'm kind of repeating myself here. If you look at that page, this is in my own portal, and it shows basically if you type in user guide there, some customers think that this is user onboarding. And if you go to the sales guide, it actually shows you how to track your deals. But does this really include what closed won means in your company? And what is the process for closed won and closed lost? If you have a generic HubSpot training, do you know what happens when a deal is closed lost? Because for me, of course, there's a process behind that. At least I hope so. But not knowing what that is, not knowing should I do something, is really a bit of a nightmare. And this is, you can see here, 4 minutes. Well, this was likely something like 5 minutes, 2 minutes. This is just a really generic way to learn a little bit about the product. And at HubSpot, we therefore also have the fundamentals training for Marketing Hub, which is a classroom training. Now, this sets you up so you know the product a fair bit better. And of course, we have a similar training, that one for, I believe it's that one, the private training for instance, Sales Hub or anything else that comes up. And you have the prices here in euro, but of course in US dollars, it's roughly the same. But
yeah.
does this really help somebody understand your company's processes?
No, no. Like, and that's where like I want so badly for this stuff to work. I still share this stuff. Like people ask, like, is there a video I can watch? Is there? And I
Yeah,
come to this page and I'm like, yeah. Uh,
but I
but
am
like,
going to say there is a tremendous amount of value in here because you must start somewhere. And if you remember that people remember about 20% of what they were taught the first time, that doesn't mean that the other 80% is a complete waste because you primer your brain to also remember that. And that is why even the 80% that you think you don't remember is pretty important. Knowing how the product works is tremendously important, but it doesn't replace in-company onboarding. And
yeah,
that is a mistake that a lot of people make.
yeah.
And that's
And
why, yeah, sorry.
it's from the start. Like we're setting some bad precedents and they can't help but start by focusing on functionality. Like HubSpot, the company, cannot build content based on your business strategy. They can,
No,
it's their job to show you these videos. This is how it works. This is black and white, right? No context at all. So when people come in and it's not connected to the context of the business and not connected to strategy, one, it's harder to like assimilate it and understand it and retain it. But also it turns people off too. It's like, okay, this doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know how this applies to our business. I'm not going to use it. I've seen that
exactly.
happen all the time.
Yeah. And that's why, for me, it's so important to also keep in mind that a training like this does not bring in the strategy part. And for me, there's so much about really looking at the strategy, but also understanding the product. And onboarding isn't a simple done process where you can say, ooh, you know what, you went through 3 days, 5 days, a month onboarding, and now you're good to go. Because if you don't remember the things, then it becomes really challenging. And that is why there are also, I should be able to share my screen right now, there are extensions that we are going to talk about a little bit more in depth that actually say, well, if a contract is sent or if this is closed won, what exactly does that mean? And of course, this is super, as you know, but it doesn't start or stop here. Super does allow you to do walkthroughs and a whole lot more. But it is something to consider that if you onboard somebody for the first time, you must make sure the resources are available to that person. And it doesn't really matter how you do that. All that matters is, does it work? And Supert is something that is, of course, in the app itself. So it is inside of HubSpot. It loads through a Chrome extension, and it will allow you to say, ooh, go to the cart and actually change whatever is in there really easily. And of
Yeah.
course, this is not the best example, but
Well, no,
what
I
what is a
actually
deal?
I love it because if you can click back on that contract sent,
Contract one or contract sent?
contract sent, like, or yeah, the one liner is that closed one.
Closed one was the one-liner.
Yeah, like how often does this one liner answer? If they don't get the answer in that moment, they stop. The process stops because
Yeah.
one, they're uncertain. They have to take a risk if they kind of try to remember the answer. In the worst cases, they just pull everything out of HubSpot because they don't know where to get it from. So the first question is like, can they self serve the answer? Right. And
Yeah.
if that's a yes, the next question is, do they know how to self serve the answer? Right. Third, maybe third, is it easy for them to self serve the answer? Because I come back to, and we create so many times, we create documentation, but it's like on the Google Drive, it's on the local folder. Like, where do I get it? Right? How do I access it? Oh, this one says V1. I see a V2 over here in somebody's email. Like, now I don't trust anything in this place. And it's like all of these things go into the farther away you get, from the process itself, and the harder it is to self serve. Like, people got a job to do, right? And they will do anything in their power to get it done. So if you don't help them do that, right, we're not doing our jobs over here.
Or you have somebody who will create something for themselves where everything becomes siloed, and I have my copy of a help document and I'm going to share that with you while you update your version, and you get all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah.
I
And
think
I'm
that
not,
everybody in a bigger company has seen that happen.
oh, yeah. And that's where, like, I've gotten so much insight for how much of that happens on paper, like before a company has digitally transformed. And like, I'm guilty of it too. Like, it's just in the moment. It's like we know inherently we just did this thing 5 times in a row. But then, like, if I really want to make it repeatable, I got to build out all the stuff. I want to name it right. I got to figure out the naming conventions. So for right now, I'm just going to create a post-it note on my desktop, and that's where my meeting link is going to be. So I can just copy and paste it no matter where I'm at,
Yep.
right? And that kind of, as I say that out loud, it's like, how do I access the thing I need, or the answer that I need from wherever I am at right now? especially digitally, right? That's why Chrome extensions are so powerful, when whether it's HubSpot, whether it's Super, whether all these things, that it's like no matter where I'm at and all these browser based tools, I have the thing that I need to take the next step, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't just stop there. It's also like if I ask you, how do you actually create a payment link? And of course, you know out of the top of your head, but you can also imagine that somebody who doesn't do that a lot, if they actually have a walkthrough where it says click there, click there, click there, and you're done, they're not going to use that walkthrough a lot. They're only going to use that once or twice, and then it's served its purpose. Then it's up to the next person who comes up with the same question. But that means that if you onboard somebody, and let's say you onboard somebody 6 months from now because that's your successor or whatever you are in a company where you maybe onboard a new teammate, you know that there's a resource and you know that instead of explaining it to the same person 6 times, you can say, no, I'm going to explain it to you once. We're going to do it together. And if you have questions, and you will have questions because you are not going to remember everything, then this is how you find it. And I think that that is the most powerful way to do it. It does not, on the other hand, take away that you should actually hold somebody's hand and say, well, for the first time, we're actually gonna be real humans and we're gonna do this together.
Yeah. No, that's perfect, because so much is like, oh, like we treat it as a replacement now. Okay, this other things that exist. Don't ever ask me like about this
Oh,
stuff.
hell
You
no.
have it, right? Like you might have to. So you've solved it for them 5 times. Now you make the thing. They're gonna ask you 5 more times. But now
Yeah.
you respond with the link to the place that you want them to start using. You just got to build it in. So this is all a kind of a push pull of how do we help them right now? How do we help them, when we're not around? How do we help them answer, that I got to put a fire out right now? But also, like, maybe they're in a position where they've got 5 minutes and they can learn a little bit about why they
Yeah.
have that question or why we do things that way. Is it easy to go check out the 5 minute video? Right. And that's where it's like, it's nobody's saying this is easy, right? Like a tool like Super makes it easy to have it like as a result. But
Yeah.
asking these questions like, do we have the video that tells the person about this? Do we have the documentation? Like, does it read well? Like humans, like they learn in different ways, they have different needs, and that changes. Like if I'm talking to you as a customer right now and I feel an immense amount of urgency, my brain starts to shut some things off.
Yeah.
And right. So like how am I
That's the
serving
beauty of
those,
the design.
right? How am I serving these multiple, ways that people can show up? Because then, like, oh, shit, again, as I'm talking about this out loud, meanwhile, we're telling ourselves that we're going to create this consistent, great customer experience. Well, we don't support this consistent experience on the inside. And of course, the math does not work out there, man.
No, but for me, the main value of something like this is, let's, for instance, take the payments link as the example. If I tell you how to create a payment link, it's your very first day at a company, you hardly know what HubSpot is. I told you, so now you ask again, and I come over to you, and it's like, Chris, I already told you like 10 minutes ago. And for whatever reason, because you have a lot on your plate, the next day you don't know. What are you going to do? Are you going to mess around and find out and potentially screw everything up? Or are you going to ask me again where you know that that's not going to be a pleasant
Right.
experience?
Yeah. And we're here to support. Like, we're an extension of HubSpot. We're just as important as HubSpot in most cases, where, like, if we're not serving both support through the tool, the strategic understanding of the tool, all these things got to work together to support the users. And that's what onboarding is. Onboarding is not a checklist. It's not a certificate, right? It's not a course completed. It's we find all these ways, and I'm actively trying to figure out like how we can help people understand, experts that can help them. Like, can they really, how do you assess somebody's knowledge of the tool right now? It is very hard. Like, the tool has
It
changed a
is
lot.
extremely hard. Yeah.
Everybody has different experiences. And without this one-to-one communication, like, there's not much else. And none of these, even the best hub helper Harry, right? It's not going to apply it to your business strategy, your interpersonal dynamics of your organization, right? So there's all these things. The cool part is when we have the documentation, when we have the tools in place to set that foundation, now we can think about that stuff. We can deal with that stuff. We don't have to always be fighting fires. Yeah, man, I'm excited to talk about, more, user onboarding. And because I think in a lot of cases, it's just like, do you understand that this is the approach you need to take? Right? You got the people who can support it, right? You got full-time people sometimes that's like, hey, it's your job, to get everybody in HubSpot and successful at HubSpot.
Yeah.
How much
But
time
that
could they just shift a little bit?
but that means you should have the first onboarding, you should have a knowledge base that really works well in whatever form. And Supert is a prime example of that. But whatever works. And is it worth maintaining that? And what is your strategy around that?
Yes. If it works, if it's going to continue to work, if it
Yeah.
scales, all those things come to mind. And that's why we suggest the tools that we suggest, especially HubSpot. I mean, all the superpowers you've been looking for to do. It's like, instead of being afraid to boil the ocean, I need to find a different analogy in this social moment. But like, if it's what everybody says, like, instead of trying to avoid that, let's help businesses do all of the change, all of the new things that they know they need to be doing. This is how we start to build that foundation, so it doesn't always feel like every day is a new ocean to figure out, right?
Exactly.
So let's find some more opportunities of putting our people in better positions to be successful. Do some real onboarding, continuous onboarding, build some strategy into it, and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.